Hello, welcome back to Review. Glad to have you here. We are going to just jump right in today. Growing up in an entrepreneurial family, Brad Bonham had influential examples of leadership and management that fueled his passions. He has spent 15 years of his career owning and running businesses. Now, as co-founder of Walker Edison, on track to do about $800 million this year. Bonham supports several charities, teaches college-level courses, and was voted 2021 CEO of the Year for Utah. So give a warm welcome to Brad Bonham.
Thanks, Pri. That was very nice.
Welcome. We're glad to have you. Let's just jump right in. Talk to me about your entrepreneurial spirit. Where did your passion for entrepreneurship and business come from?
From a really young age, I've just been fascinated with online home furnishings. And it was like, what do you want to do when you get older? I want to be a furniture salesman. And that's really what I told everybody.
Very passionate about
literally
that.
Has not, no, I'm completely lying. I grew up in a home where my father, I never saw him work for anybody else my entire life. And so I was born actually right here at BYU. And then we moved when I was an infant to California, and he started his first business out there. His father before him, entrepreneur. His father before him, entrepreneur. And so when somebody would ask me, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? It's like, hey, I want to run my own thing. And so in the summers, I would go work at my dad's business. He would take me to negotiations, meetings. I mean, I feel like I had a bit of like an MBA as a teenager, just kind of watching how he ran things and how he would run his business and his business partners and how they all interacted. And so that's like growing up in that kind of an environment, it was like, hey, what do you want to do? I want to start my own thing.
So it really was just kind of in the bloodline. You were born into it. It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. I mean, look, my dad had a great deal of success in a number of his businesses, and others failed. And it was kind of a good learning lesson. For me as a young man growing up in that environment, really kind of gave me a heads up onto what to expect as I embarked on my own thing.
So you may or may not have had a passion for furniture at a young age, but when did the idea for Walker Edison formulate?
So it was when I was in college. I worked for Coldwell Banker Commercial here. I was doing real estate for a guy named Brandon Fugel. It was one of my mentors. I had side hustles always going on, okay? Like always. There was always some side hustle that I was trying to get in. I was a big car guy growing up. I had, during college, I had this old Toyota 4Runner that I had modified myself. I took the wheels and tires off of this car, listed them on eBay, and they sold in like a day for like $600. And I was like, oh, wow, cool. That's, $600 I didn't have before. And then I went to KSL.com and I looked, and there was like 6 other sets of those same exact wheels and tires, and they were all asking like $200. So I took my $600, I bought, as many as I could, relisted them on eBay, sold them all for the same dollar amount. And like pretty soon I'm like this like tire and wheel like expert. And I have my entire garage filled with like random tires and wheels. And I'm selling all of these things on eBay, and to this day I have like hundreds of these wheels and tire transactions on my eBay account. And it's so weird. They're like, "What are you doing for money?" I'm like, "Well, I sell wheels and tires on eBay." Like no one says that, right? But I was doing it. The biggest problem with selling wheels and tires on eBay, and what I started to notice was the shipping cost of those wheels and tires was killing some of my sales. They're like, "Hey, I'm paying $500 for the wheels and tires, but it cost me $300 or $400 to ship them out to me in Florida, so I'm just not going to buy them." And so I started thinking, I'm like, what can I resell as a side hustle to that costs a lot less to actually ship? And I landed on watches. I was always a watch guy. I always had like a cool watch. They were and so I again kind of went to KSL. I joined every single online watch forum. I actually became a certified, and I forget what the designation is. Like I am a certified jeweler. Okay, like I don't even know if my wife knows that. Did you know I'm a jeweler? Yeah, I am. And so I had, I joined all these different wholesale clubs and everything else, and I started keeping track really closely in Excel spreadsheets, models of watches, what their movements even were and how that drove value. And then I started keeping track of sales prices across the internet. And so anytime one of these watches would come up in a local classifieds or anywhere that I could really get it, I knew ahead of time whether I could make money on that or not. My whole goal was like, let's reduce risk. Like, I don't want to guess if I can make money on something. I want to know ahead of time that I can make money on something. And so I had this like superior information data set that, to my knowledge, nobody else really in my space. I mean, certainly there were people monitoring those things, but it gave me an advantage compared to everybody else in that little market, when I went on eBay to go sell things.
So from tires to watches.
Yes.
And then to furniture.
Yes. So I was selling. We had bought a small business that did those gift in a balloon things. Have you guys ever seen those stuffed animals that go inside balloons and whatever? So that was me in college at a certain point. I was looking for product expansion. Sourced some product out of China. They were like wicker gift baskets, right? And I'm like, hey, I'm already selling this gift and balloon product into Walmart retail stores. What else can I sell? And my buyer that I was working with was like, well, hey, we need some more gift products. And so I sourced these baskets. I went over to the Canton Fair. We had the problem with selling baskets is that these baskets are like cost you $1 and you sell them for $2, right? And you're like, oh, that's a cool profit margin. But I've got to sell millions of these things. Like, inventory was a nightmare. I had to move a ton of them to make any money. And I thought to myself, I need something at a higher price point so I don't have to sell as many, but I liked the margin profile. And so that was I went to the Canton Fair in southern China. I saw a TV stand that I had recently purchased from Best Buy for $250. I walked up to the lady and I said, hey, how much is that? And she said, it's $28. And so in my mind, it was like light bulb, right? Because I knew what I was looking for from a margin and pricing perspective. I just didn't know what product it was going to be. And so, purchased a container kind of on a whim, brought it in, drove to Overstock.com. If you guys haven't dealt with Overstock.com, they are a phenomenal group of people to work with. I knocked on the door. I said, hey, I have a TV stand. Would you like to buy it? And she's like, well, we probably do. This doesn't happen anymore. This was like 15 years ago. Like, we all carried guns around on our belts 15 years ago and, dueled in the street, right? Like, this was like a long, long time ago, it feels like, in the world of e-com. A guy named Mike Hoy from Overstock.com comes down. He was the head of merchandising. He said, this is exactly what we're looking for. I'm going to teach you how to drop ship. And he handed me the vendor paperwork. And that's how Walker Edison started. That's
incredible. And honestly, you learned so many things along the way that set you up to be ready for the opportunity, which I think is great. So talk to me about what were the hard times at the beginning of Walker Edison? What were the challenges?
Yeah, I live in a little bit of like an unsexy space. Like investors call you and they're like, hey, we saw that you were on the Utah Business Fast 50 list. It's like the 4th year in a row you've made that list. What are you doing? And I'm like, I sell furniture on the internet. They're like, oh, and like we want tech companies that don't make any money. I'm like, well, then, I happen to make money, so maybe you don't like me. You know what I mean? And so, look, I would say cash was always a concern. As an entrepreneur, it was like, look, my wife and I got married, and the very first week, my power got shut off at our little townhome. That we didn't have that, like, how do you pay the bills conversation before we got married. And I remember Megan coming in, and she grabbed this, like, when you get the power shut off, that means for many, many, many months, they've notified you that you haven't paid the power bill. And then they come to your house and they put this huge yellow sticker across the door, and all your neighbors can see it, and it says, you are a delinquent power payer, okay? Like, it's very embarrassing. And so my wife went to go open up the garage door. Garage door doesn't work because my power's been shut off. She drives out to me at Walker Edison. I think I only had like 5 employees at the time. It was also very embarrassing for me because she had taken the sign off the door, comes in, slams it on the desk, and she's like, hey, like, what's your deal? I just married a bum, like, why aren't you paying the power bill? Anyway, cash was always a concern. I had to prioritize what bills I paid, and it was like, I wonder how long it will take the power company to shut off my power. I found out, like, it was a proof of concept, okay? Like, it was like 4 months, by the way, so don't do this. Yeah.
4 months, okay, just to take a mental note. Great.
Cash was always a concern for us, though.
So within the first 10 years, though, you did not do any capital raises.
We did not take a single dime.
So how did you do that, and what was the thought process behind that decision? Behind that decision.
Yeah, we're not the only company in Utah that's done that. If you guys have heard of a company called Qualtrics, Ryan Smith and his brothers didn't take a dime for the first 10 years of their business either. We had a desire to maintain control of our company. The early days of the internet, no one really understood. It wasn't like I could go hire an executive with 25 years of experience to run my e-com dropshipping business, because e-com dropshipping had only been around for a couple of years when I started the company. And so we were in a space that no one understood. We were in a space that was kind of unsexy, even though margins were awesome and we made a bunch of money doing it. So in a way, we wanted to bootstrap, but also we couldn't really raise money. like nobody wanted to put money into our business. I actually remember a couple of meetings where we had some kind of marquee names in the Salt Lake Valley that came in, and they said, "We see no potential in your business, and you will amount to nothing." And I'm like, I don't like this meeting very much. This is not, thank you for coming, but please don't come back. Kind of a thing. It was hard for us to hear because we knew what we had. We saw numbers going from $10,000 a month to $100,000 a month to $1 million a month, and it happened relatively quickly. And we're like, how does no one else see this? And fortunately for us, nobody else saw it because it allowed us to have that first mover advantage in our space.
So then came Operation Moneyball, yes?
Yes.
So talk to me about Operation Moneyball. What is it, first of all, and why did it work so well?
So first of all, for any of the entrepreneurs listening here today, I hope if you take one thing from this, I want to kind of tell you what really revolutionized our business. If you've seen Operation Moneyball, it's with a gentleman named Brad Pitt. Often I'm people will be like, "Are you Brad Pitt?" No, I'm not Brad Pitt.
That was
we look
my
the
first
same.
thought.
Yes,
Yeah.
we look exactly the same body type. We were having meetings. This is like 8-9 years into the business. Okay, we were at about $18 million in revenue, if I remember correctly, and 20% EBITDA margin. So on $18 million in revenue, we were making $3.5 million a year. Of that 3.5, we took every single penny and rolled it back into increased inventory purchases. Okay, so there was no lifestyle, there was no anything else. My power was getting shut off. Like we had to make choices individually so that we could continue to grow the business through retained earnings. We were having meetings with major accounts, Walmart.com, Wayfair.com, Amazon.com, and they were like, "Wow, you get really good reviews on your product. You ship extremely quickly. If you guys send an order to me, I acknowledge it, pick it, pack it, and send it within 2 hours." And 15 years ago, this is like unheard of, right? And now it's kind of an expectation because Amazon Prime has done this to us. These meetings went something like this. You ship it really well, it arrives undamaged, great reviews, people like your product, but you are out of stock all of the time, Walker Edison. Like, why can't you guys stay in stock on stuff? The demand was insatiable for our product. Matt and I, my business partner, Matt Davis, that started the business with me, we went back to our office and we said, how out of stock are we? So our inventory ordering process went like this. We'd get a call from the warehouse. They'd say, we ran out of stock. And we'd say, maybe we should order more. And that was like the complexity of our inventory management system, and you're like, how did this guy ever survive? I don't know is the answer. Pure luck. So we went, if you've seen the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt plays Billy Beane of the Oakland Athletics. He's the general manager of the A's. So he makes a lot of kind of the managerial decisions around who they hire for their baseball players, who they acquire. And Billy Beane turns the Oakland A's organization into a purely data-driven enterprise. There's a very famous scene where he's sitting around the table with his scouting organization, and they're saying, man, I like that guy's arm, or I like the way that guy hits, or whatever. And Brad Pitt asks, one, can we afford them? And they say no. And he says, well, what the heck are we talking about then? And it boiled down to Billy Beane figured out what the KPIs were around his players that actually win ball games. And it boiled down to simple things like walks and hits. Like, not the guy that always hits a 500-foot home run, but it's the guy that gets on base the most. I think on-base percentage, OBP, was like one of their key KPIs. If you are on base more than the other team, the likelihood of you scoring more runs than your opponent increases dramatically, right? Like, it makes logical sense, but everybody in those days was more like, that guy throws hard or that guy hits a lot of home runs, and there wasn't a lot of like data behind the actual decision-making that was made. Matt and I stopped and we said, what wins the game for us? Like, what KPIs do we need to monitor? And it really boiled down to, you're out of stock too much. When you're out of stock as an e-com dropshipper, your product comes off site, you lose page rank so that you're not found as much, and then it takes months worth of being in stock to build that page rank back up. And so for the very first time in our career at Walker Edison, we said, how out of stock are we, and how much money do we need in an infusion of capital to be in stock more often? And then what do we think that'll do to sales?
And what did it do to sales?
So we went out, we found a group in Salt Lake, they're called Black Oak Capital Partners. We borrowed $3 million. In a high growth environment, selling equity is way more expensive than borrowing money, like infinitely more. We knew that we could be that billion-dollar enterprise, and we only valued it, $20 million. And it's like, I don't want to give up half my business just for $3 million, whatever the equation amounted to. So we borrowed $3 million. Of that $3 million, we put every penny of it into. Is this not working? Oh, is it cracking? Yeah. All right. Can you guys hear me better? So of that $3 million, we put every penny into the inventory that our Operation Moneyball told us that we should be in stock on more often.
So from that point, you were then chatting with investors, yes?
Yeah.
Had you before?
So that $3 million came in. The inventory blew through. We actually paid off that $3 million in 2 quarters. So it took us about 6 months, and the money that we had made from that, inventory spend allowed us to pay off the debt like immediately, quickly. So we had a passive shareholder in the business. The business had become, fairly valuable at that point, and we wanted to buy our passive shareholder out. And so that was the first time that we really explored kind of how do we do that, and where do we go to get the funds to buy that person out.
So when you have a relationship with an investor, what is your preference on how that relationship works and what it looks like?
I think it's kind of an interesting question, and I think it has to do with the lifestyle and maybe kind of or the life cycle of your business, and really what you want out of the business, right? And so for us, because our industry was so nascent, there weren't a lot of like value add private equity groups. We just knew we needed more capital to grow. And so for us, it was like, can we get the capital? The answer was yes. And then 2, who do we partner with that won't disrupt us and say, man, you guys really need to open up your own brick and mortar stores, And it's like, no, we don't, because we're really good at e-com. That's where we want to focus. And so it was like, can we get the right deal? And then can we get the right partner that will just support us, not try to run our business and take over and kind of, make us focus on things that don't make sense to us.
So as young entrepreneurs are going and looking for capital to raise, what advice do you have for them during that process?
Yeah, it kind of needs to align with your objectives. I see too many founders selling way too much too early in the process. And so proof of concept is key. I'm now an investor in a bunch of these businesses, and in fact, a business that's part of RevRoad. If you've proven the concept and you just need cash to grow, that's different than let's hope this works out. And so I would just advise you, look, you don't want a board packed full of like financial people that have just put money into your business. You are the founder. You had the vision. You know what you want. Stick to it. Find somebody that believes in you and your vision, that's willing to put their hard-earned capital dollars behind you so that you can go execute and carry out that vision. I can tell you right now, I'll use Qualtrics again. Had they sold 60% of their business in the first 2 years of Qualtrics, I don't know if Qualtrics would exist today. because they would have lost the ability to control the direction that business went. And I'm looking at myself as well and saying, hey, we knew what we wanted. We knew what we thought we knew how to get there. Find somebody that supports that vision.
It's been a very clear part of what I would say your personal brand, that you care about people and especially your employees. Will you talk to me a little bit about your employee appreciation policies and how you really infuse employee appreciation into the entire culture of Walker Edison?
So I'm going to tell you kind of a funny story. So I taught college. I'm not a college graduate. I was sitting in Asian art history at the University of Utah, and I was getting text messages from my employees at Walker Edison. And I remember standing up in the middle of class, closing my book, and saying, I'm going to go run Walker Edison. And so I was a senior at the University of Utah. Fast forward a couple years later, I was actually asked to come back and teach kind of some entrepreneurship classes. And they asked me, hey, you need to come up with like a grading rubric. You need to come up with, like a syllabus and stuff. And I'm like, well, look, either they get a product out of China, which was the class I was teaching, or they don't. So I'm either going to give them an A or I'm going to give them an F. To like academics, like that's pretty shocking, right? They're like, well, what if they get a C? I'm like, well, did they get the product or did they not? You know, and like it was very. So, I bring this story up because, like, what business, a lot of these business classes teach, they're like, you need to come up with a business plan, you need to come up with the core values, you need to come up with like these things that I will tell you, you don't know what your business, like, often I'll see entrepreneurs come up with their business plan, and within the first week, they've torn it to shreds because they've figured so much out in that first week or month or year that their business plan has just changed. We didn't have core values like assigned to our business until a year and a half ago. So I'm 14 years in, right? I go to my employees and I say, what do you guys think the core, based on how we've run this business in our lives within Walker Edison, what do you feel like our core values would be? And I left it to everybody to come up with what our core values were. And they came up with 9, and I'm not going to go through each one, but the number one core value that they had learned at their time at Walker Edison was we give. It's a play on Walker Edison, right? So we give. And that is the thread that has bound our organization together, is that our employees, we pay them, and certainly they volunteer to give back to the community that we feel like has made us so successful.
I love that, and I think it really speaks to the type of people who also work at Walker Edison as well. And I love that they were included in selecting those values. Talk to me about a major influence in your career. Who was an incredible mentor and influence for you?
I mean, I've mentioned my father today. I mean, he certainly kind of set me on the path of being an entrepreneur. But I idolized people. I'll bring up somebody like Larry H. Miller, okay? Have you guys ever read his biography? So Larry Miller, you should read it if you haven't. There's one thing that stands out. He worked harder than everybody else. At the end of the day, if his competitors were working 40 hours, he worked 80. And if his competitors were working 50, he worked 100. And you just do some simple math, and that guy's going to get more done, and maybe become less effective. Maybe there's like attrition with what your output looks like over time. But you do that year in, year out for 20, 30, 40 years, you're going to accomplish more than what your competitors are accomplishing. I mentioned working for Coldwell Banker and Brandon Fugel when I was in college. Brandon was a highly successful, in fact, he served an LDS mission. He closed 2 real estate deals while on his mission. It's like this famous like story. He's like, I paid for my mission on my mission, you know, and he smuggled like one of those old brick cell phones into the mission and like closed these deals. And anyway, yeah, if you ever run across him, have him tell you that story. But I wanted to emulate the success that I saw in some of these other people. And so I spent a great deal of time studying what they did. So recently there's a book about Phil Knight called Shoe Dog. Like if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, find those businesses or those people that you find to be really inspirational, or at least the results of their efforts are something that you want to emulate. find out how they did it. Find out how they got there. Find out what their work ethic looked like, what the lucky breaks were, what the hardships were that they had to go through, and learn those lessons before you even get to them, so that when you do encounter those bumps in the road, you're like, hey, Phil Knight had to go through that same thing when he started Nike. Let's look and see what he did, and there have been roadmaps that have laid before us that you can rely on and try to emulate so that you don't have to go through those same difficulties.
Well, while we have you here, of all your ventures and experiences selling watches and tires, and of all the places that you've been, what is one of the greatest lessons that you have learned?
So proof of concept is key. So my aspiring entrepreneurs, in my class, my class's goal, whether you got an A or an F, right? Like it was pretty binary in my class that I taught. I taught for 5.5 years, entrepreneurship. You got an A if you got product for free from a different country. Okay, so I taught people how to produce in other countries, and they had to get the product for free, because my whole thing was like, we're not going to take any risk in this class. Okay, the only risk that we're going to take is the time you spend, because if you don't have any money, what else can you do? Well, you can work at it. And so I had a whole bunch of students that proved these concepts without having to outlay any cash. I remember one of my students said, hey, I like those skinny neckties, those floral skinny neckties that I see all these younger people wearing. Like, I'm old, and so I wear like these big like paisley like ones that everybody makes fun of me for. But apparently these skinny like floral neckties, like that's the cool thing to wear. He found 3 different factories that were willing to send him for free 100 ties each in different variants. He took each of those, he sold them for, I forget what it was, 20 or 30 or 40 bucks, took all that cash, rolled them into the next order. Like this was no risk, guys. Like he used that product that was sent to him to buy future orders. And if you work hard enough, the risk goes down. If you're smart about things, like if you have no capital, approach any of these situations as an aspiring entrepreneur. I have no money. How do I still achieve my goal? And so that's really key.
For a lot of entrepreneurs, we're in an interesting time of excitement as entrepreneurs are jumping on new opportunities and markets that have opened up since last year. And we also have entrepreneurs who are kind of picking themselves up after a really, really hard year. So what opportunities do you see? What silver linings are there for those who are either picking themselves up or entering the race?
Well, first of all, the last year has been unprecedented. So in 41 years of my life, like I've never experienced anything like the last year. Certainly those people like me who were pure play e-com, we benefited greatly. Those who were in kind of a brick and mortar setting for half the year last year, you were toast. I mean, your stores just shut down. I would just give this advice. If we could enter our time machine and go back 18 months, what would you do differently based on what you know today? And let me give you some examples. I would have started a mask company, okay? PPE, all right? There have been billions of masks sold in the last 18 months. Had any of you worn a face mask prior to 18 months ago? Like, I hadn't, if you could go back in time and replay that situation, I would have stocked up. I would have filled warehouses with toilet paper, okay? And you're like, wow, if I had gone to an investor and I'm like, we need to invest in toilet paper, they would have been like, no, I think that's not something we want to put our money in. And in hindsight, you could have made millions and millions and millions of dollars on toilet paper, masks, protective things. I know that a bunch of these like local distilleries turned into like, the hand sanitizer stuff, like that's real entrepreneurial. Like, okay, how can we capitalize on what's currently happening in the market? And I think there's opportunities to learn from each one of these situations so that you can put your business in a position to excel the next time a COVID comes around, or next time, like I'm dealing with terrible ocean freight issues right now. Like, what can we learn from these situations and then apply them to our businesses so that the next time this happens, because there will be a next time. It might not be COVID, it might be something else, but there will be a next time. So how do you position your business to take advantage of those climates when they come our way?
Before we open it up for audience questions, what is a principle that you use to guide your career?
So I do think life is really short. I think money comes and goes. Hopefully it doesn't go too quickly. But I hear a lot of entrepreneurs come to me and they're like, hey, invest in my business. When I make a ton of money, when I'm rich, I'm going to give back a ton to the community. And let me just stop you like right there. You can give back today. When we started Walker Edison, one of the very first things we did is we said, no matter what happens, we're going to try to do good in the community. And so we called the Utah Food Bank, and Matt, my partner, and I, we stopped unloading the containers. We stopped taking customer service calls. We went for 4 hours. I think it was like week 2 of Walker Edison. We went for 4 hours, and we boxed up food at the Utah Food Bank. We had no money, by the way. We had like 23 cents in our checking account. We went and boxed up food for the food bank. I very quickly, I joined the board of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Like, I actually didn't join the board. Megan told me we were going to be Make-A-Wish wish granters. That requires no money. Call Make-A-Wish Utah today. If you haven't, look back over your last 12 months of your life. If you're that inspiring entrepreneur that so badly wants to give back in the future, once your business makes it, start today. Like, you don't need $1 billion to go do good in the world. You need time and you need a desire. So I don't think people can just go from uncharitable to charitable once they have $1 billion. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. We are going to open it up for audience questions now. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. As a reminder, we will run a microphone to you and hold it in front of you, so no need to touch it. But the time is yours.
So I'm really interested in your bootstrapping. I don't want to get a bunch of money right now. I want to self-float for a while.
Yeah, that's great.
So the biggest question that I have is the inventory. So I'm trying to map it out myself. You have so many clients. You fill those orders. Then they reorder. So my products will go about 2 months. So those first batch of orders go out. Month 2, nothing. Month 3, they'll be reordering. At the same time, you're acquiring new clients. How does that cash flow look like to be purchasing more product so you satisfy your original audience while you're capturing more?
So what it almost sounds like is you have a demand, like you have plenty of demand for your product. It's like, how do I stay in stock?
Yeah, I haven't even like blown it up marketing because I need to capture this dance first.
Yep.
Before I get into what you went through, out of stock.
So this is like the classic inventory problem that we all have, right? Like when we're a consumer products business, it's how do I stay in stock? Because your inventory is going to suck up cash, right? Like there's a cash flow problem. When I mentioned one of our biggest challenges, I mean, it's still a challenge today, right? Like I've $140 million of inventory across 7 warehouses in the United States right now. It has always been a problem for us managing that. We chose to just use the money that we were able to earn from our business to fund the inventory that we sold to clients. And so this is where as entrepreneurs we get to make that decision, right? Do I go out? Do I borrow money? Do I put it on my credit card? Do I take equity? Do I bring on an investor? And it's kind of a choice that we have to make. I would just tell you this: set really clear expectations with your customers. What customers don't love is when they find out 3 weeks after they've ordered that you're still a month and a half out, right? But what I have found is, and this happens in a lot of different consumer products businesses, I recently interviewed a couple of female founders of a business that's doing about $10 million a year in revenue, and they've been really good at communicating the expectation of when that inventory will arrive in their customers' hands. And just by being clear, like, bad news is going to be bad news no matter when you hear it, okay? But if you hear it up front, there's a certain trust factor that happens with your customers and you as the entrepreneur. And when you deliver on that timeline, they're like, I know I can trust this person with future orders. So I would say just communication is probably super, critical with what you're trying to do, and then just balancing. That's like the balancing act, and this is where businesses either succeed or fail, and that's why I think communication is so critical. Either you go borrow money, you raise money, or you just use the money that you're earning from your business to order as much as you feel safe ordering so you can fill those future orders. Yeah.
Hey, Brad. So I'm really interested in your success, but I'm more interested in your failures because, as we all know, it's a long road to success, right? So my question is, and not to call you out or anything, but my question is, what would you say is like your personal weakness when it comes to business, and what do you do to like overcome it or turn it into a strength?
So I've never actually failed at anything. So
Okay. So
yeah,
that's
no. You are 100% correct. I was actually talking about this with my wife on the way up. I'm like, I'm going to give this speech, and it's going to sound like we've just crushed from day one, and holy cow, we've made every right choice everywhere. Let me give you an example. We were selling a bunch of product through these e-commerce marketplaces. We saw our brick and mortar friends. So brick and mortar retailers in our space make 50%. If they buy a product for 100, they're selling it for 200. If they buy a product for 500, they're selling it for 1,000. We saw a lot of potential margin expansion if we were the retailer, right? And so we kind of believe in like failing and failing fast. This took a little bit longer to fail, and it was very painful. We opened up like 6 brick and mortar locations along the Wasatch Front, and it was selling patio furniture. Okay, it was called Oasis Patio. We hired a whole bunch of these kids that usually go out and knock doors selling pest control, but that's like a brutal job, and we're like, well, come sell patio furniture. It's so much more fun. And we aligned that strategy with this seasonal patio furniture initiative. Well, it snowed until June 15th of that year. Like snow through June 15th. No one buys patio furniture when it's snowing outside, okay? Because you can't even go sit on it. We lost $1.5 million that summer. It almost took the entire business down with it. But we learned really quickly, like, stick with what you're really good at. Our business was growing 40% a year through e-com marketplaces. We attempted to gain more margin by becoming like this brick and mortar retailer. We learned really quickly, 1, we're not equipped with that. 2, it's really hard to drive people to your stores when they've never heard of you before, versus like Ashley Furniture or RC Willey locally. Like, those are institutions that have name ID that have been around for 50 years. Like, in order for us to gain that kind of name ID, either you have to pay for it, or you just got to kind of, work on that brand, for years and years and years. We learned we're really good at e-com. That's what we decided to focus on from that point forward. Yeah. Yes. Do we have microphones?
So you talked a lot about how you learned a lot about entrepreneurship from a lot of these side hustles when you were younger. What are some of the lessons that you learned as you were growing up that helped you succeed not only with the side hustles but also overall with your long-term success? Yeah,
that's a good question. So 1, I refused to go into debt for the side hustle, right? Like, I wanted the side hustle. Interestingly, my side hustles revolved around things that I knew a lot about and that I really liked. So it was like cars, watches. I tried golf clubs for a little bit. That's actually a terrible industry with really low margins. So don't do that. Just go play golf. Don't try to sell golf. For me, it was like I didn't want to quit my day job until the dollars usurped what I was making in that day job, right? So even with Walker Edison, it was like we didn't move full-time into Walker Edison until the dollars were there that would support us moving over. So it was, again, I'm like a big proponent of avoiding risk at all costs. If you can justify moving over because your side hustle has turned into something that will sustain you financially, cool, then move over. But like, don't quit your day job until you've proven that. You know what I mean? That was kind of my number 1 takeaway.
So then how do you balance your time? If you have the day job, you're trying to do the side hustle at the same time, how do you separate that?
Yeah, I also had a wife and 3 kids, and like, I didn't even talk about them. This is like the worst interview ever. You know what I mean? Like, so work was my passion. It was my hobby. When I talked about emulating people that I found to be very successful, Larry H. Miller, Brandon Fugel, like they really loved what they were doing, right? So they loved the hustle. They loved overcoming these challenges. Like one of the key differentiators between people that I've seen that have been really successful and people that are not is the people that are not give up. Like they stop at a certain point. And it's like, look, if your idea was good when you started it, it's still probably good today just because somebody told you no, like I don't want to carry your product in my stores or whatever the case may be, and you're all disheartened and so you stop. Yeah, you're never going to succeed. It's the men and women that hear the no and they don't take it. They're like, absolutely not. You need my product. Let me tell you why. Or, okay, if you don't want it, I'm going to go to the guy down the street, and I promise you they're going to want it, you know? And you just knock door after door after door after door until you get that break. Like, do not stop. Never, ever, ever quit. That, to me, is like the difference between those entrepreneurs that make it and those that do not.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brad. Curious from your perspective, what do you see are kind of the future storm clouds that either create opportunities or things that you kind of want to avoid?
So what's really interesting is that tax conversation. Like, I feel like they're kind of self-deprecating, and I'm like, this is rad, you know, like this information is so valuable. Like, yeah, you're welcome. Like, and interestingly, like through being an entrepreneur, like I knew most of the information that they put up on the screen. So, storm clouds, okay? The U.S. economy's backbone is built on small business. Like, if you actually look at the data and like what drives our economy, small business of like businesses 50 employees or less, it's like the vast majority of like our GDP is like put out through these businesses, right? And this is me, this is you, this is other people. We were only able to grow Walker Edison through retained earnings. I worry that in an environment where taxes go up dramatically, I feel like that's disincentivizing to growth for small businesses. And so I worry about it. Businesses that are big and established like mine, we can absorb a 7%. What are taxes going up? 7%? What'd you say they were? Yeah, so 28 for C Corp. Like I can absorb that. Small business often cannot. So I'm worried about that. I will tell you right now, we live in an interesting inflationary environment. Prices are going up. I gave the largest price increase in 15 years I passed along this year because my ocean freight, I might be going in a little too much detail here, but like historically, for a 40-foot container to be shipped from any of my factory partners to my door here in Salt Lake was $4,200. Spot rates as of last week were $18,000 for one container. And even then, it's taking 2.5 times as long to come into our country. And so these are real headwinds that we're having to deal with as consumer products businesses. Those will eventually solve. I do worry government can influence our life. Like, I'm really involved kind of behind the scenes. I sit on the Governor's Office of Economic Development Board. I'm on the World Trade Center of Utah board. Like, I really enjoy public policy because I think policy that's created by politicians has a direct effect on our lives here. So I would encourage every one of us actually to be involved and to make our voices heard. But those are some of the things that I kind of worry about, right? Like global macro issues that may negatively affect us as entrepreneurs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. So this has been great, Brad. Really appreciate it. And
Thanks,
I'm going to ask you 2 questions. One, you alluded for a minute there about buying out one of your investors. And I wanted to see if you could add some more color to that. And then I'm going to give you a great segue after that to telling us a little bit more about Megan and your kids.
Okay. So our very first few containers that came in, you had a choice. For me, and we're talking about money and funding inventory purchases, I asked my dad if he could fund those first few containers. So he did. and he became an owner in the business. Those first few containers, and I worked alongside him. He taught me a ton about how to do this, right? Fast forward about 10 years later, he was a passive shareholder in our business. I had been, CEO from many years earlier. We paid him back. I think it was like a 30,000% return on those first few containers. It was actually a really fun day for me to pass that money along to him. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. That's
Yeah.
a great part of the story. Few days are better than when you can give that kind of return to people who believed in you and others wouldn't.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about Megan and your kids, and how did you prioritize all the things you were working on, all the challenges you were tackling, all the hours you were putting in with family?
There were. Let me be super clear. Like, I would not be where I am today were it not for the support and encouragement of Megan. Anytime I had like a really hard problem that I needed to tackle, it seemed like Megan always had the answer. I'm like, why don't you go do like you're way better at this than I am. Like, why don't you go do this? So that kind of support. I will also say, from a timing perspective in my life, my kids were very little the first decade. Like infants. I've been able to hire some really great people that have allowed me to prioritize my family kind of higher up that chain over the last several years. The first few years as an entrepreneur, if you want to get something done, nobody's going to get it done but you. And so Megan has unloaded containers with me back in my warehouse, right? You remember these containers that we would unload? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and building furniture. Like, she would come to us with the trade shows, and like she's putting, look, if you've ever built ready to assemble furniture with those little Allen wrenches, look, we try to make them better than this, but it takes hours to set up an entire showroom, and so me, Megan, Matt, his wife Holly, we would go put these showrooms together, and that's real support that many people don't have, that have certainly led to our success in the business.
Round of applause for that.
Yeah.
For the last question that we always like to ask, what is something fun that your success has allowed you to do?
I will answer that in a couple ways. So one, it has allowed us to amplify I talked about We Give being our number one. Now that I have, hundreds of employees here in our corporate office, we have locations around the globe. Every single person within this organization is bought into this, and it's been really fun it's not just me and Matt boxing food at the food bank, right? You have thousands of people across the globe that pitch in, that are incentivized, by the way. If you join Walker Edison, I give you hours similar to vacation hours where I will pay you for volunteer time off. It's VTO. So I will literally pay you. We track it as a business. Every single month in our all hands, we go over the hours that we have volunteered that month as an organization. And then in my management meetings, I'll call out my sales team and I'll be like, you guys are falling behind on your volunteer hours. Like, let's go. So that's been really fun. I will say, like, my hobbies, I like cars. Brent's right here. Like, we're car people. My vacations in cars have become a little bit nicer than my old Toyota 4Runner. Yeah.
Well, those are great things to celebrate success with. So we are grateful that you have come to be with us today. We're grateful for the knowledge and the wisdom that you shared. And we have a little gift and your official invitation to judge the entrepreneur competition is in there.
I'm in.
Okay,
That's
you heard it here first, folks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Amazing.